All right, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to This.Javascript State of Browsers. Really excited today because we have a lot of not new browsers, but new people joining us for the State of Browsers. I am going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly. My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet. And I am, again, very, very excited to host the This.Javascript State of Browsers. So for those of you who are first joining us, This.Javascript is an event that happens every few months or so, and we'll do things like the state of frameworks, state of browsers, state of WebAssembly. We're going to be doing a state of GraphQL coming up, and also a state of testing. So it's a really great way to find out about all the new and exciting things happening with the technologies and tools and browsers that you care about. Bringing up state of testing, next week we will have a state of testing, and the time is actually wrong, sorry. It's going to be at 10 a.m. Pacific. And so if you care about those different things, we will be having folks like folks from Cypress and Apple Tools, and a bunch of other different tools, Selenium as well, talking about, hey, what's going on with the state of front-end testing. A few updates on other This.related things. So Modern Web, if you care about exciting podcasts. Recently, we did an Angular update with a few of the core team members, Ben and Hans, about what's happening in Angular. We also just recently featured a really cool product that you all should be using, WebHint, that's coming out of Microsoft. So hearing about WebHint, if you're not using it, you definitely should be. And in addition to that, we also recently did a podcast on Houdini. And so I was very excited about that one, and to hear just how big Houdini is. You don't realize how much Houdini can actually do for you and how much surface area it covers. So check out Modern Web if you're excited about podcasts. Today, we're going to be having some really awesome folks. So Paul Kinlan from Google is going to be talking about the state of Chrome. Kenneth will be talking about the Intel browser as well. Jonathan from Brave will be talking about Brave. Paul will be talking about Beaker. Frédéric will be talking about some of the work done with Webkit. And Harald will be talking about Firefox. And then we have Daniel who will be joining us and talking about Opera. So very, very excited about these different things. Feel free, by the way, so we have a live chat in the live stream. So feel free to ask questions on there, and we'll save all questions for after the live stream. But we'll be doing just 5-minute updates and then basically doing discussion and ending remarks after that. So with that being said, I wanted to go ahead and pass it off to our first presenter. And that first presenter is going to be Kenneth. And Kenneth is going to be talking about Intel's browser. So Kenneth, take it away.
Let me just try to share it on my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So, hi, my name is Kenneth. I work at Intel, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Kenneth Rhodes. I'm part of like the Intel Web Platform Engineering team. We mostly work on Chromium-based products, so Chrome OS, Chrome for Windows, V8, WebRTC, WebGPU, etc. We work on improving the web platform as a whole, basically moving the web forward, using like improving specifications, adding better new implementations, but also focusing on power and performance across all these stacks. So Intel is a pretty strong believer in standards, and we're thus a member of the W3C, the TC39, and the Node.js Foundation. We also have a representative on the W3C Technical Architecture Group, which is happens to be me. And that is also where we're mostly active at the moment. So this is a picture of the tag where you see me in the middle. Intel is actually really involved in web standards and the web. So here's just a list of, we're having like 72 participants in the W3C. And this is a list of the current specs that we're editing. So as you see, that's across like a lot of different things, such as like hardware connectivity, progressive web apps, and media. We're also chairing 4 different groups, so like working groups like device and sensors, second screen, web of things, and tracking protection, as well as upcoming community groups such as machine learning. A bit of like about the stats about like Intel. We're currently the number 5 contributor to Chromium. So it goes up and down a bit. Sometimes we're number 4, sometimes we're number 5. This year, at least in November, we're number 5. Same thing in V8, number 3 in WebAssembly. But as you see, we're also focusing a lot on graphics and even on testing. So our current focus areas is a bit like diverse. We're focusing on bringing machine learning to the web so it can run fast and use everything's available as part of the hardware. We're working a lot on like devices and sensors. We have implemented generic sensors in Chrome, and we're currently taking over like geolocation as well and creating new spec. All of these efforts is pretty aligned with the Google project Fugu. And we're also like very focused on like WebAssembly, for instance, adding support for threads and SIMD. So with generic Sense API, this is a new spec we've been working on mostly in Intel. This is now a candidate recommendation. It's even part of the Fitbit SDK. So currently working on adding like WebDriver extensions so this can be really tested well, as well as working on a new geolocation sensor in collaboration with Google. We've also written a motion sensor explainer because like when I started working on sensors, I found that there was like no good books about like how to actually work with motion sensors, do sensor fusion and all the likes. WebNFC is being updated. It has been stalled for a while as we're focusing on generic sensors. We're making it a more modern API. It's now constructor based. It will use like a board controller signal. It will use event tag instead of its own homebrewed solution. And we're planning on fixing the implementation and running an origin trial as soon as possible. With the web app manifest and progressive web apps, we're working on stabilizing the spec and resolving like remaining issues. We did move to WebIDL, and there's a few issues due to that we're trying to fix as well. We also landed maskable icons. This is not yet implemented, but this should allow you to bring like an icon which can support a mask. So like for instance on Android, if you want your icons to be rounded, it will work fine. On the graphic stacks, we've been implementing WebGL 2 in Chromium, and we're now like championing WebGL 2.0 compute as an intermediate solution until WebGPU is shipping. With WebAssembly, we're mostly focused on SIMD, which stands for single instruction multiple data. So this is really important for like video codecs, games, etc. Where basically instead of like, for instance, multiplying with one number, then you might be able to multiply 4 numbers in one instruction. So this can really speed up some certain things. So we're working on that in WebAssembly. WebRTC, we had our own stack, something called the Intel Collaboration Suite. This is now being open sourced in Q1 next year as the open media streamer. We also have our own HEVC encoder, which is also open source. We've also been working on image capture, adding like more capable APIs for people that are using the web camera on the mobile web, for instance, like focus distance, exposure time, and even like support for raw images. With immersive web, it's the same. We've mostly been working on like promoting it and giving like specification feedback, and we're now focusing on WebXR instead. So basically, that's my very short update. And with that, I will bring it on to the next person.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kenneth. It's very, very exciting to see what you all are doing. So I love moving the web forward, and thank you so much for participating in all the standards related stuff and everything. It's great to see Intel just participate in general. So next up will be Sampson from Brave, and he will talk about updates in Brave.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see here. I'm going to jump over and start to share my screen again. Okay. And I think, oops. Okay, it's probably going to show the entire screen here just for a moment. I apologize. There we go. Is that working?
Yep, working well.
Excellent. So as Tracy said, I'm Sampson from Brave. Obviously, we're a Chromium-based browser as well. We started out as kind of an experimental project on top of Electron. Electron wasn't quite suited for web browsers. It wasn't built to take in third-party code and then just run it on your machine with access to Node APIs and everything. So we had to do quite a bit of work, fork that, and create Muon, But then, again, Muon was kind of a little separated from the Chromium project. So we had quite a bit of work to do if we wanted to keep up to pace with Chromium developments. And so what we wound up doing was developing Brave Core. Brave Core is the new Chromium-based version of Brave itself. And so I want to say on behalf of everybody that uses Chromium, thank you to Intel and all the other companies that contribute to the project and to make it such a fantastic platform upon which to build a diverse set of applications. And I understand, Microsoft had a pretty big announcement too. Unfortunately, Patrick wasn't able to be with us today, but they're doing some really exciting stuff on top of Chromium as well. And so one of the things that we loved about this was just by virtue of switching to Chromium, we're able to do things a little more easily. So we have basically a long tail of but a series of interop issues, web compatibility issues that just get fixed magically, like literally thousands of things whenever you move to a platform that is more developed via browser. We also get things like we can create a dark mode now, which is unbelievably popular amongst everybody all across the web for our precious eyes. And let's see, by virtue of doing this as well, we have kind of better platform support all across the world and such. And so there's, again, quite a few people that are developing the Chromium project. And so it makes for a very solid foundation upon which to build a web browser. One of the other things that we did was we're kind of famous for being an ad and tracker blocker, which kind of ruffles some feathers. Whenever you cut off ads, you do make the web faster. I mean, up to 8 times faster sometimes. You cut out more than half of the data that you actually load on mobile in particular, but you also do cut off revenue streams for many content creators and publishers out there. And this is what made the web that we all love so dearly so great and made it what it is today. And so we introduced Brave Payments back during the Muon days, but we basically, just as we kind of sunsetted Muon in favor of Chromium, we actually kind of sunsetted Brave Payments in favor of Brave Rewards. So this is kind of built from the ground up. And so one of the things that we started doing with Brave Payments and with Brave Rewards was giving out token grants. The entire browser itself is engineered in such a way that we want to connect contributors with content creators so they can support one another directly with the creation of content and with the sustainability of the web. And so we have the attention token, which whenever you turn on Brave Rewards inside the Brave browser, we actually offer a free grant. And so up at the very top right-hand corner, you can see there's a grant there. And this is a monthly thing as well, but there's always one whenever you install the browser the first time as well. And so you go through the process of a simple CAPTCHA to make sure you're a human and that we're not getting gamed by a Sybil attack. You drag the triangle, and then there's 30 BAT magically inside your private built-in in-situ wallet. The wallet itself is really cool. We've seen in the past where there's auto-contribute support there. So as you browse the web, the browser is already tracking where you're going. It has your history, history of your searches, which YouTube videos you watch, which Twitch streamers you may be enjoying. And what it does by default is it distributes your monthly contribution pro rata. So if you spend 10% of your time watching This.videos on YouTube, then 10% of your BAT for that month will go to This.'s account on YouTube. If you spend 5% watching Ninja on, playing Fortnite on Twitch, then 5% of it would go to Ninja playing Fortnite on Twitch. And we love this because it's a completely anonymous and private system. Not even Brave knows who you are supporting. We actually use zero-knowledge proofs and the anonymized protocol, and that magic right there creates such a mess for anyone that's trying to observe what's going on that it's just imperceivable. It's difficult to tell who exactly is supporting which channels. And so once you've accepted your grant, you can actually go to websites like the Washington Post. They're trying to discourage me from eating raw cookie dough. This is heartbreaking. But I could actually send them an immediate tip if I wanted to, so I'm not doing month-to-month support. I can just do a one-off contribution. And the great thing about this is it's a one and done type of situation. So it allows us to more quickly support content creators across the web. And so whether that's a journal, a post, a news item, or a YouTube channel, for instance, Trapped Nation, they've got 24 million subscribers. They're a verified publisher with Brave. I could send them a quick one-off contribution if I really like a particular song I'm listening to. And then we actually have, in the very near future, there's other applications of this that we think are going to be pretty revolutionary for the web. So there's a lot of platform sites where the actual content is created by users and not by the service itself. One example of this would be Twitter. Another would be Reddit. YouTube is a big example of this. And so we actually want to bring this type of functionality over to Twitter and Reddit as well. So if you really like a tweet, we give you an opportunity to quickly send them 1 bat, 10 bat, 5 bat, something like that. The same for a maybe a question on Stack Overflow or an answer on Stack Overflow. It's really great to get upvotes, but if you can return something monetary for that, I'm sure people would appreciate that as well. And so we kind of think back to the early days of PayPal, where Elon Musk had said, you know, the scaling issues, the growing issues were not that difficult, because when you tell people that there's money waiting for them, they tend to go and get it. And so we're pretty excited about the prospect of this entire apparatus that we're putting together. Also really exciting news for us was we got to work with HTC, and so we're going to be the default browser on the new Exodus 1 kind of blockchain-focused phone itself. And so this is a really kind of niche device that's developed for the emerging blockchain economy, the emerging blockchain community, and we're super thrilled to be the first browser on there, just kind of given the alignment of ideals and perspectives on that industry. We also are quite busy in research areas too. And so if you watch the brave.com/blog page, you'll notice every now and then a couple of research projects that come up. And so one of the really exciting ones was Speed Reader. And this is where we're basically given a second look to something that has been around for quite a while. Reader mode has become quite priceless to so many of us in the way that it makes the web more consumable. There's some problems that have existed from the beginning with reader mode, though. Reader mode tends to load everything on the page, including scripts, and then it restructures, in many cases, the DOM to show you just what is legible, just what is readable. Or it might put a fixed element up over the top of the page and just show you that content. Well, that's a lot of wasted data. In fact, it's, I think, upwards to 87 times larger than it really needs to be. And so what reader mode is the invocation of machine learning to actually go out and figure out which websites, which domains can actually be parsed before we actually call out on all these third parties and such. So if we can take the first request and then from that request determine whether or not reader mode the page is readable, then we can actually save the user quite a bit of bandwidth and processing and even privacy concerns, because you don't have to load third-party scripts, third-party ads and trackers and that type of stuff. And so we see in the work that we've done so far, average speedups ranging from 20 to 27 times, bandwidth savings in the order of 84 times. Requests themselves were dramatically reduced, 51 to 77 times. And of course, all of that will yield much better memory consumption, which we all kind of want our browsers to have a lighter footprint. And so this is going to be a pretty exciting new feature coming to Brave. We figured that we want to do a reader mode, but we don't want to do the kind of status quo reader mode. We want to really try and see if we can push this a bit further and bring this up to date with contemporary technology that we have at our disposal, primarily machine learning. And so the privacy wins there, the performance gains are there. We also are identifying kind of our weaknesses, what we cannot do. So right now we cannot build search engines, for instance. And so we partner with DuckDuckGo here in the United States, and we are very excited to partner with Quant over in Europe. I think they have 150 million users over there, and Quant is actually doing their own indexing. They're one of the first, maybe the only European search engines to be doing their own indexing. And they actually don't install cookies. They don't put cookies on your machine. They don't track your search history. They're one of the few sites over in Europe that don't have that GDPR warning across the bottom of them whenever you visit them, because they actually don't collect any information from their users. And so we love that we're able to find some kinfolk, some people who are kind of ideologically aligned with us, and partner with them. Just to keep it real short, I guess there's a couple other items that I would mention too, is the Brave referral program, brave.com/refer. This is for content creators. It's about $5 in BAT for every individual you bring to the Brave platform. And so we've seen quite a bit of excitement about that. And then just to touch on some of the standards work and the involvement that we have with the W3C, we're actually going to be submitting an idea, kind of a discussion on JS or JavaScript isolation using what are called trust labels and membranes. And so we actually love the way the history kind of burst out of nothing, like this Cambrian explosion, 25, 30-ish years ago, scripting 24 years ago. It's all really great, but it's also led to some really kind of unsavory things. For instance, third-party JavaScript that is loaded into your page has first-party privileges. It can do everything your first-party JavaScript can do. And so we think that, with the evolving topography of the web, with the evolving privacy landscape, that we need to kind of reevaluate some of the more primitive features of the web. And Brendan Eich, obviously our CEO, is the guy that gave JavaScript that original power it had, and gave it the first-party privileges that it enjoys today, even when it's loaded from third parties. And so he's back reevaluating this and helping to contribute to this JS isolation via trust models and membrane spec that we'll be submitting before too long. And of course, this all is super exciting for us. And I want to say thank you again to Tracy for letting us hang out today and talk a bit about what Brave is doing.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's if any of you have interest in kind of looking back, I should do a compilation video of we do this every 6 months with browsers, and Brave specifically, listening to those updates. You guys have really made some pretty significant changes over the past few months. It's
so exciting. I mean, we're super pleased to be in this space working with everybody else. This is what I was saying, going back to the very beginning with Intel in particular, starting off the episode today, the collaborative work that comes around the Chromium project in particular, the kind of testimony to open source that is, and the fact that things that we thought would never be possible, like Microsoft announcing that they were going to be using it. It's just a testimony to how great this stuff works when everyone is kind of working together.
Yeah, I love that. More collaboration is definitely, I think you've seen the web in the past few years definitely move towards a more collaborative approach, and it's just amazing to watch. So thank you so much for all of that. Next up, we're going to have Paul Frazee, who is going to be giving us an update on Beaker.
All right. Hey, everybody. Hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Right on, let's get started. So our humble little experimental Chrome fork soldiers on. Okay, so first I'm just going to do a quick rundown of what Beaker is in case you're not familiar. Beaker is an experimental peer-to-peer web browser. What that means is that the Beaker browser is communicating with other Beaker browsers to exchange websites and data so that you can connect directly with your peers instead of having to use an intermediary. And so whenever you're browsing around, we still use HTTPS and all that, but you have this new protocol called DAT. It works a lot like HTTP, except that it is peer-to-peer, so you can actually serve DAT websites right from your own computer. And when you do that, it's also a little bit like BitTorrent. You share bandwidth with other people, so you can actually download the site from more than one person. Here in the screenshot, I got 5 other people that's helping me keep this site online. And we're all contributing bandwidth and keeping this site independent and freely hosted. And one of the sort of interesting aspects of this is because you're able to host these websites right out of your browser, you can create the website directly out of your browser. So you can just press a button, a new public key is created to act as your address, and there you go, you have a new website. And so in a way, Beaker is both a browser and a publisher. So why we think this is really cool? Well, for one, in the traditional web, you have to distribute your content through different platforms like Facebook and Tumblr and SoundCloud and things like that. With a peer-to-peer web, you're able to distribute directly to your audience, which means you have more control over it, more direct ownership over it. Not to beat up on somebody who's getting beat up on a lot already, but Facebook is sort of well known for charging people to reach their own audience. That's something that just wouldn't happen if you had a peer-to-peer web, so we think that's a pretty good idea. So I love the independent publishing story of peer-to-peer, but actually one of the things that gets me really excited is, for hackers, not these kinds of hackers, but these kinds of hackers, the people who like to have open source modifiable software, because when you have a peer-to-peer web, your applications and all their code are actually being distributed from one client entirely to the other as a kind of self-contained package. And so you are able to receive all the source code, you're able to view all of the source code for an application, and then you could even fork the source code and then share that back out into the web. So what we're hoping is that we can create a platform that's a little more creative, a little more independent, a little more hackable this way. This is what that ends up looking like. If you go to the view, if you click view source on the Beaker website, you get this sort of GitHub looking interface where you can see all the files inside of it. And you got a little button right there. You can make a copy and start to make your own version of the website. So, okay, that's the background of what we're doing. Let's talk about what's new since the last This.Javascript state browsers. We brought in finally a preview mode into the development process. So whenever you make a website, you want to do some work on it, but you don't want those changes to go straight out into the network. It took us a little bit of work to figure out how to get this right, but we finally have the ability to set up a preview mode, which sets up a little nice temporary personal URL to see what you're doing. And then once you're ready, you can review the changes, get a nice little diff, and hit publish, and there you go. So much better publishing flow. That took us like 6 months to get right, so thank God that's finally out. What else? We put in a Favicon editor. This is just a little fun way to throw together the little icon that shows up in the tabs of your website, just so you can have a little fun and keep things creative. You can also upload an image if you wanted to, because you don't have to mess with a pixel editor every time. Watchlist. This was a smart thing to get in. Because it's a peer-to-peer network, if you don't have any computer online hosting your website, it's not going to be up. So to deal with that, we added this idea, the watch list, which is an ability for Beaker to keep an eye out for the website to show up. And then whenever it does, it'll give you a little notification saying, hey, that website that wasn't there before, you can finally go look at it. So just helping keep things reliable. Oh, and we also got a big performance boost when I finally moved the DAT stack out of the main thread. So, if you tried it before and you had slowdowns in the UI, this is a really nice improvement. And what are we working on? We're working on a ton. Some of it I can't talk about right now because it's just not quite ready. But one thing that I'm really excited about is a PeerSockets API. Basically, we use a DHT to connect users to each other. So you announce yourself on the DHT, you can discover the other users, and this is how you're able to find websites on other people's computers. We're in the process of exposing this as an API, kind of like WebRTC, except that with WebRTC, you have to do what's called signaling to reach the other people and arrange a connection. The idea here is that we can turn the DHT into a global signaling system so that you no longer have to have any server that you maintain. And that's really important because we think these peer-to-peer apps, what's cool about it is that you can deploy them and then you don't have to maintain them. They just live on people's computers. You're not running the servers anymore. So we think leveraging the DHT to arrange these synchronous connections with each other would help open up more use cases for peer-to-peer applications. You can send chat messages to each other. You can send files this way. It really opens up the range of possible applications when you're able to kind of communicate with each other. And our main protocol engineer has this idea of what he calls progressive deployment, which I think is a really neat idea, where you start out running a service inside your browser. People are connecting to you to do work, but then whenever it gets a little bit too big, people are connecting to you too much, you could move it up into the cloud. But since they've been connecting to you by public key, nobody knows. So you've progressively deployed from your home computer out into a cloud service. I think that'd be a really cool thing if we can get there. We also have a new editor in the works. The existing editor, which is really nice, is an inline editor, kind of like what GitHub does, which is great for like one-off edits. But actually, a lot of times people just want to get in and have something a little more like Sublime inside the editor, inside the browser. So we've decided to take Microsoft's very awesome Monaco editor and make a little bit of an IDE experience inside of the browser, so that if you don't want to ever have to touch the file system, if you just want to stay in the browser and make a little website, you can. So we're real excited about that coming along. And then finally, this is what I am really heads down on right now, is getting an identity system into the browser. We have these peer-to-peer websites. And so we've been asking ourselves, what happens if you treat a peer-to-peer website as your personal homepage, attach it to the browser, and start making it possible for applications, both built in and in user land, to be able to access that website and publish and read files off of it. And we've done experiments in the past with a Twitter clone that works basically the same way. So we think having it integrated into the browser will open up even more possibilities for lots of different applications to work together and have a nice open data ecosystem. So that's where we're at right now. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Okay, so next up, Paul, Kinlan, are you okay to present, or should we?
Give me 2 or 3 more minutes because it gets really aggressive in the office.
No worries.
So we'll see.
No worries whatsoever. We will move on to Frédéric, who has been doing some cool work with the team over at Igalia has been doing some cool work with Webkit, and really, really excited and happy, Frédéric, to have you be a part of this. So I'll let you go ahead and present.
So, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. We can see your slides too. Good. Awesome.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, hi, I'm Frédéric Wang. I'm working at Igalia, and I'm gonna give a quick overview of the WebKit, the state of WebKit. So just to get the big picture, we are one of the many implementers of the web platform. We are involved in standardization committees. We contribute to conformance testing, and of course, we also participate to the development of open source web engines. So now if we focus on WebKit, as you know, Apple is project lead. They maintain the iOS and macOS parts. And also they're working on Safari and also related proprietary components. Regarding Igalia, we are mainly contributing to the Linux part of WebKit, which is used, for example, for embedded systems or also for desktop browsers on Linux. But we also contribute to the web platform, so the platform-independent part of WebKit. And also more recently, we have started a collaboration with Google AMP. So we've been able to contribute a bit more to Safari, more specifically to the iOS part. And what is really interesting to note is that actually WebKit is the only web engine available on iOS, which means that if you want to contribute to iOS browsers, you really have to contribute to WebKit. So now if we focus on the features, as you probably know, Apple doesn't really comment on future releases. But during the WebKit contributor meeting last October, they've given a quick overview of what are the plans and what we have done during this year and next year. So one of the features is, of course, web standards. As you know, they have shipped service workers, and they plan to continue to improve performance for next year. I think early this year, they shipped Apple Page support for payment request API. Also, they shipped Web Share API, for example. Web animation is already close to be complete. For now, it is under preference flag. Other contributor, like I mentioned, Google, for example, was been working on intersection observer. At Igalia, we are also considering implementing the similar resize observer API. And we also have a student who is working on CSS logical property. And of course, there are more and more features. There are also plans to do big refactoring, so for layout, scrolling, and JC, so the JavaScript engine. The idea is to make the code cleaner, and one of the goals is, of course, to improve performance. Regarding to multimedia, we helped Apple to continue the WebRTC support. Also other things like media source extension. For graphics, I think Kenneth mentioned that Intel was working on WebGPU and WebGL2. And I think Apple mentioned they plan to do the same. One of the big features is also security and privacy. So for example, at Igalia, we contributed iframe sandboxing, but Apple also has other ideas like process per origin, fingerprinting mitigations, and so on. Performance is, of course, also a very instrumental part of the browser. So they have planned to not getting slow and possibly to, if possible, to get even faster on existing benchmarks. one interesting thing for developers is tooling. So as I mentioned that they plan to improve the web inspector. I think they mentioned, for example, improving the style editor. And finally, there are everything related to, all the things related to APIs. For example, Webkit APIs, which are used by embedders. For example, the users of the Webkit view, which is used, I guess, for Chromium and Firefox on iOS. Another interesting thing that we helped at Igalia was to do the WebDriver support. So now you can automate testing of the browser, of the Webkit browser. So now regarding the features that we are working on at Igalia, I mentioned in the previous slide that there are some effort on scrolling, and one the thing that we are considering is to make some scrolling on Mac asynchronous, so that it improves performance. We also would like to make all the overflow nodes scrollable on iOS without the need of using this -webkit -overflow scrolling CSS property. And similarly, as you probably know, iframes on iOS are by default they are expanded to take the whole size of the content, so they don't scroll. Well, you can actually make them scrollable, but you have to add a lot of hacks, and it has some bugs. So the plan is we are currently working to make the iframe scrollable by default. Other features that I can mention is smooth programmatic scrolling. We already have some patches that are submitting for review. Overflow behavior, it's one of the features that was introduced by Microsoft. So we currently started to experiment some patches, but I think they're working on Mac, but on iOS we'll have to work a bit on this. Well, actually, I think Apple will have to add new API, new system API in order to make this possible. Regarding JavaScript, well, we have done a pretty good job on Begint. I think most of the operators are now implemented, and we are continuing to polish things and to implement the missing operators. And class fields, we submitted some patches for review, and we are waiting feedback from Apple. And there are many more features. We are working on bug fixes and interoperability fixes. So as you can see on this slide, I'm not going to mention everything, but I can, for example, highlight that we are currently working on the loading code. And in particular, during that process, we have been improving the interoperability of XHR and Fetch APIs. And then I have a couple of references that you can look into if you want details, including some videos. And that's basically it.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting to see Webkit and that represented, and obviously all the amazing things that Igalia is actually doing on the web. So thank you so much for doing that. Next up, we will have Harald talk about Firefox. Are you ready, Harald? What does your shirt say? You've got a fox in this fight. Okay, there we go. Is it a web fight? You're muted, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. You start. Yeah, this is from our recent all hands. We just came back from an all hands all Amazon met.
Love it.
And we always get T-shirts. That's what we get paid in. So I'm Harald from working on Firefox, Northern Chrome-based browser. So I work on the DX team. Which keeps this talk more developer focused. And thanks everybody for gathering, because today is release day. So today 64 is hitting the market, and 63 is going to become the past release. 65 is already dev edition if you download that one, and 66 just today became, or yesterday became nightly. So this is a mix of different things and all very developer-focused themes. So going into first one, going into simplify dev life. And that's a theme we see reoccurring where the web keeps growing. There's new standards, like you all presented all the new things coming to the web, new APIs and everything else. So and it's very fast moving. So people struggle with how to actually build stuff on the web, making decisions about frameworks and APIs and how to make a website. So this is going into layout, for example. Flexbox is being widely adopted now and we're doing the same for grid. So we learn from providing great grid tools, helps adoption and helps people understand very complex spec. So we're landing the same in dev tools for Flexbox highlighter and sizing. So you will see the intrinsic and extrinsic properties, understand like, why is this box going all the way or why is it shrinking the way it is? So that's what people struggle with in Flexbox. We ran more surveys around that. So this is hopefully making this easier. Save some time. Same for editing. So oftentimes in the dev tools, you will just edit away. You work on CSS, you try to fix a bug, you try to make it look correctly. You're working with your designer, trying to change things. And this is often we see people scribbling things on paper and then carrying it over to the editor and then refreshing and it's all gone. I missed the property. So this should be way easier. And the way we want to do this is just keep your changes around, show them in a nice div, make it really easy and straightforward and pain-free to edit in the browser. The other piece, so on the web, it should be really easy to work on accessibility, but it's not. It's often an afterthought. It has to be from the beginning a design process, and it's not easy to understand, do it right, do it wrong, what they need to do first. And we land a new accessibility panel in 63, and in 64, we land a new color contrast and indicator. And what's interesting here is that often you have text on background colors or gradients or images, and this is actually taken into account. So if you, in this case, you have a contrast ratio from 4.04 to 9.18, so that's basically just a different color backgrounds in this image. So as soon as you select an image, we take the whole text with the background image and calculate the contrast for that, which makes it really easy on rich websites to do the correct contrast. What's been landing for a while, you see 62, 65, it's landing in a lot of small pieces. So source maps are kind of the bane of developers' existence, where you want to submit them correctly, but then DevTools kind of do one thing right, and then the rest looks kind of off. So we heavily invested in source maps to get them in your development cycle, to make them look like they should look like. So your sources look correctly, and your hovering looks correctly, and the scopes look correctly, and you can execute the right things in the console, and they're all mapped. And that's something that right now, it actually feels really native, like you don't have source maps in the background, and it's just very transparent. And that's the way DevTools should feel. Whatever you use, whatever build chain you use, DevTools should just feel right. And that's coming together here really well. So if you had problems with source maps in the past, we'll have to try it out again. And it's all coming together thanks to Babel. So Babel in the front end parses the original sources and the generated sources, and then can actually do the mapping. So this is where pulling in open source, and Logan Smith from the Babel team is now also working on DevTools. So there's a lot of collaboration in the back that makes this possible. So, and we also sent out pull requests to several frameworks where we tested them and found their source maps weren't correct. So that's all coming where then we need to not just fix the tools to have a better developer experience, but also reach out to all the tools outside of our realm to generate the correct input so DevTools work well. Another theme we see in DevTools is just the struggle of cross-browser development. And even though with one less engine, it's maybe less of a struggle, but it's still just people switching between DevTools is something that's hard. You learn all your muscle memory, you learn where things are and how things look. And one surprising feedback we got for Firefox is that developers were thrown off by the console being aligned to the footer, as you see on the left. So we aligned with Chrome, so people have less cognitive resonance, and got really positive feedback about that. So that's even the small pieces where we're different without a really good reason. So there's no it doesn't make it easier to use it. It's on the bottom. It's just a design decision from the past. So we want to align where possible to make it easy to switch browsers and just work across the web. Same as filling in the gaps. We didn't have extra Java breakpoints since Firebug get deprecated. So this is adding it back. So we're like ramping up on some of these features that make it easier to debug complex web apps. And of course, performance is important. So in the theme of everything gets faster, we also worked a lot on performance. If you tried it out in the past, we have a ton of improvements landing for responsiveness and just loading off the toolbox and everything else. So the other theme, fast. Since Quantum came out in 57, every release had some of that. And of course, WASM has to be mentioned in the Firefox talk. So here's the WASM slide with Lynn's great presentation on the skill tree of what's missing in WASM, what's coming after the MVP. And one of the missing pieces is fast JavaScript, which landed in Firefox 63, which is really important to get WASM into frameworks and other interesting applications where you don't want to execute a big chunk of WASM, but execute like smaller compute-intensive tasks. And hopefully it's unlocking more framework usage in the future as well. So working with different frameworks. There's other miscellaneous things coming. So there's an image decoding attribute, which allows you to control when an image decodes. If you load it just on the site and then want to inject it, you want to make sure it doesn't flicker and gets decoded after you inject it to the DOM. So it's more fine-grained control, and clear site data allows you to control when to actually clear all the data from user's domain. Very important if you want to use service workers and do something wrong, you want to have that ready if you make a mistake, because service workers tend to otherwise be very sticky. So compatibility, interoperable, more than ever important. And for Firefox, that's an interesting one that we don't talk about too often, like on stage. But it's all the things that browsers have to do to work on the web. And there's a lot of things in there that make the old web work. If you imagine the web, like all the websites out there, many of them are never touched again. So there might be CMSs where content is still being added, but the CSS and JavaScript is not there. So there's like event return value, which is historically in non-standard, and which we're landing to make some more websites work. Navigator platform cannot return 64-bit. It breaks some websites. So we have to do a 32-bit on 64-bit Windows. So you see the ridiculousness of some of these. So always take care to test the websites. Go back to your old websites, maybe update them and test them again. And all that goes to webcompet.com, where users can report issues, and then we follow up and file platform issues and prioritize them on impact. So the more reports we get, the better understanding we get of the web. And we're trying to ship window.event. So and that even hits like seasoned developers. So you forget an event argument in your callback, and you basically fall back to the window.event global, and it just works in Chrome and in other browsers and in Edge. It doesn't work in Firefox because window.event is non-standard, and we didn't have it. It's now in nightly, and hopefully we can get it out to more websites, but it keeps breaking websites that are not tested in Firefox because people expect the behavior to just work. So linting and other things help with that, but we also need to be proactive. So more coming 64, WebKit appearance, beloved for many developers because you can finally theme your inputs and other things, or make your non-inputs look like inputs, but it's non-standard. And there's a lot of things that different websites depend on that we're landing there. And also Windows screen left and screen top, always intact. So more websites that depend on this work. So all kind of from past mistakes where people didn't test on all browsers and just shipped it, or had a very limited scope in what browsers it should work on. So this unlocks more of the web for Firefox. And all feeds back into standards, like this one, for example. So shout out to Chrome for fixing this one. So min height auto wasn't applied for Flexboxes, which made the website look correctly if you didn't apply min height in Chrome, but looked very weird in every other browser. So that's where more engines on the web help. So these bugs don't burn in the platform as de facto standards. And that's great that Chrome actually did internal outreach. So this fix broke internal properties in Google, but still they went back, fixed those, and then now it's rolling out. I forgot the version, but it's coming. Last of two themes, so private with Firefox and giving users choice. We want to make sure that they can opt into what data they share across the web and prevent tracking. One piece is the DNS of HTTPS. So because networks can get away with providing untrusty resolvers, and it's really hard for users to know the risks and how to protect themselves. So it's a good default choice to have. And we collaborate with Cloudflare to give users the choice to protect against on-path eavesdropping and tampering with the DNS over HTTPS. It's also important here that we transmit as little data as possible over the web, so we don't leak any user information. There's more in Lynn's blog post if you're interested, but it's currently being tested in Firefox 64. Then also in Firefox 63, we start giving the option of blocking third-party cookies, and that's something similar to what Webkit already does, and we're building on top of that. And it's interesting because it's a big part of like just what the amount of data that gets carried for users through the web, and it's also good for developers to know when it happens. So with each of these interventions where we give users more choice and might break behavior on the web, there needs to be good development tooling. In this case, we're flagging since 63 and also more coming in 66, flagging tracking resources in a network monitor. So you can see if a resource you might be loading could be affected by content blocking or the cookie blocking behavior. So you can defensively code against that. So you shouldn't depend on your third-party resources, just like to keep your site up, and single point of failure is bad, but this will give you another hint to keep an eye out there. Then with Chrome and shipping that in 64 and Chrome in 70 is distrusting the semantic cert problem. So if you have friends who are still on semantic cert, I assume the audience in this podcast isn't, but please tell everybody. So capable. Last section is the bucket list of all the other things that are landing on the web. So Firefox Reality is being updated. There's the WebXR device API landing in 65.66. It's still being nailed down, which allows you to do VR and AR in the browser. And more things coming soon and nightly. Feature policy, reporting API, intrinsic sizing for CSS, scroll anchoring, which makes page loading and noisy websites much easier to use. CSS containment, which is great for performance and gives you more fine-grained control over how layout is affecting the page. And resize observer, which gives you a fast path to know when elements go bigger and smaller. And just an outlook for 2019. So Gecko View is our project to make Gecko more embeddable for mobile. And there's a lot more browsers coming in 2019 powered by Gecko View that then hopefully can bring a strong sense for Gecko on mobile as well. And that's it. You can download the developer edition on this link, and you can follow me or the Firefox DevTools team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Harald. Really enjoyed having you as a part of Browser Contributor Days as well, that I hosted with Adi Osmani back at Google a few months ago. So thank you for participating and being part of all of that. And speaking of Google, next up we'll have Paul Kinlan, who will talk about the state of Chrome. So Paul, I'll let you take it from here. You are muted, by the way, but I love this. Who wrote?
Is that good?
Yes, Manny or Wasim did that drawing. I love it. It's so nice.
Yeah, it's a nice one, actually. It's good. Yeah, he sent me through the other day. It's nice. Yeah, anyway, I'm Paul. I lead our Chrome developer relations team. And I'm going to kind of cover some of what we're working on 2018 and 2019. It's kind of interesting. I think Kenneth and a couple of others actually covered most of what we're going to talk about, but I'll go through it anyway because I've got a little bit more detail for some of these things that are coming through. A lot of what I'll talk about though, it's covered in kind of things at the Chrome Dev Summit site. So if you want a little bit more depth about all the kind of the content and some of our priorities, there's like 2 days worth of content and talks that you can kind of look at and follow. The way that we actually ran the event was that we split it into two kind of sections. So like day one was kind of like what we would like to see people do on the web of today do, and what they should focus on, performance, discoverability, indexability, how to build modern kind of like, web applications like Squish. And then day two is like a look at kind of some of the things that we're focusing on in the future, as well in terms of kind of technologies and APIs that we'd like a lot more feedback on as well. So I definitely encourage everyone to look at those talks, just because there's a lot of kind of depth and more information that I'm going to be able to cover in kind of a couple of minutes. I think in terms of where we're trying to focus kind of some of our priorities, I'm not going to cover all of these today, but like I kind of mentioned this in the last time that we did this talk, like we've got this kind of framing for how we want people to think about building modern websites, and how we're also kind of, you know, adapting Chrome and our developer relations strategy and our outreach strategy as well, to kind of focus on a couple of key areas. I think that the biggest areas, you know, fast and instant sites and reliable sites is kind of one section. And then kind of we want experiences to be kind of 60 frames a second, high quality, high fidelity experiences. So like how do you build smooth and kind of fluid user interfaces? And then obviously kind of like there's a big piece around capability as well, which Kenneth talked about before, that we're starting to focus on a little bit more. And I'll dive into those things now. I think that the biggest things in terms of kind of performance and instant loading are the use of budgets. Like we're trying to get it so that we can provide developers the tooling, the guidance, and the rationale and the reasoning why people should care about loading performance. So we're trying to work out kind of things like best practices. We're trying to start to do a little bit more in kind of, you know, the framework ecosystem as well, of helping to prioritize their features and kind of the features and use cases that they're trying to solve for, and trying to help kind of like build them either into Chrome or across the web platform as well. But I think some of the biggest bit is like we find a lot of people don't know why they should care about kind of loading performance, or they don't have the tools to do it when they do care. And so like we're looking at kind of a lot of that space at the moment. The next phase of what we're also looking at as well is we're looking at a number of different technologies to kind of make it easier for developers to stay on Rails. So feature policy, it's like content security policy, but lets you say that, you know, if an image is over a certain size, you know, let the user or the developer know that it's broken, just so that you can kind of stay on the Rails when you're trying to build a modern website. And then signed exchanges, web packaging, and portals are three technologies that are kind of designed to help you distribute your content on a CDN, but have the origin model still stay the same as well. So that, you know, you can have, you know, poll.kinlan.me hosted on a CDN and distributed via someone like Twitter, Bing, maybe Google, or other services. But the origin model is still secure, and the security and privacy models are still kind of intact that you'd expect from your kind of modern site. And then things like portals, like the goal around portals is to enable kind of instant navigation between sites, but also pages on sites. So that if you're building a kind of a multi-page app, the navigation model looks and feels like a single page app if you want it that way as well. So there's a couple of different technologies. There's all talks as well from the Chrome Dev Summit that actually dive into a lot more of that at the moment as well. So that's actually a pretty interesting one to look at. I think the other big piece is kind of capabilities, and Kenneth talked about that a little bit earlier. But at the day of the Chrome Dev Summit, we did a big blog post around kind of like our commitment to kind of improving the capability and functionality of the web. So like there's a lot more information in that talk, but in summary, it's called a project called Fugu. It's an internal name that wasn't supposed to kind of go out. But the idea behind it is we want to enable kind of more advanced experiences, like the types of things that you might expect inside an Electron experience, where you get access to kind of deeper capabilities of the device and the operating system. We want to kind of enable that on the web in a manner which is, you know, suitable for the web, you know, maintains the security model and the privacy models of the user and the system that they're on. But like those are a couple of the different APIs that we're looking for. The link at the bottom actually gives you a lot more detail to the individual CR book kind of entries, like of what we're looking at. And the idea is that we go through the standard kind of specification and standardization process for each of these. But I think this is just more of Chrome's commitment to actually making sure that we are, you know, expanding the capability of, you know, the web platform on that side of things, and doing it in a kind of a user privacy and user respectful way as well on that side. One of the other areas as well that we're looking at, and like this slide doesn't do a huge amount of justice to it, but like we do want to help developers build modern experiences that feel, you know, rich and kind of interactive as well. And I think one of the ways that we did this was with the Squoosh app that we launched. It's just a modern web application that does something that we've never really been able to do on the web before. It's powered by WebAssembly, and, you know, we've been able to bring a number of different codecs onto the web platform. We've been able to bring them onto the web platform. They're built in C and C++, and then we were able to kind of like, you know, get functionality that we've never had. You know, the access to kind of, you know, where, you know, the PNG encoders. We haven't got GIF encoder, but like JPEG encoders, Moz JPEG, you know, available across all browsers that support WebAssembly at that point. And I think that the interesting thing is, like, yes, we've added the capability into the platform or into this application to be able to do that. But we've also introduced a number of different web components, and we've been able to kind of keep the user interface running at 60 frames a second with a very minimal payload as well. So like we can kind of deliver these experiences within 15 kilobytes for the first screen, and then kind of incrementally load all the content in. And the idea behind this is that we show that you can actually use and build applications that use web components, use frameworks, and use other modern technologies as well to kind of build to build out a modern application. So I think that was actually quite good. But I think one of the things that we're looking at as well is that this idea of we're still very keen to kind of push this idea of web workers. We don't think there's a huge amount of usage of web workers at the moment on the web. And we're still trying to make it easier for developers to build out kind of modern applications that defer functionality that doesn't need to block the main thread onto workers at this point. And so I think this is actually a good example of where we can manage all the encoding on a web worker and maintain 60 frames a second throughout the entire experience. And I think that's one of the things that we want to try and keep pushing on the web and on the Chrome DevRel side of things in particular, is like showing developers how to do that and why they should do it. And actually, hopefully, if we can, give them the tools to help them build modern experiences. I think tools like Comlink and other worker libraries are actually kind of moving in that space as well. I think one of the other bits we're looking at as well is that we're kind of inspired by a lot of the work that Firefox have been doing around kind of like designer-based tools. We launched an initiative, like a project. It's an experiment. It's not an official product just at the moment or anything. But we had this idea of, and I'm about to get kicked out of the room, so just give me 2 minutes. Cool. One second, sorry. That's all right. Sorry. All right, I'm going to try and go in this room. Just give me 2 seconds. Oh, it's dark. It's a VR room. Can you hear me? Okay, still?
We can, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. I'll give it a go. And I'm nearly finished anyway, so that's fine. So you can't actually see the room. I can see the room. But we got this idea, oh God, VisBug, which basically is an experiment into kind of how we can provide more designer-centric tooling to web developers at the moment as well. So it's an experiment. It's not a product just yet, but we're definitely keen to get a lot more feedback on that. And I think one of the final pieces that we're trying to work on at the moment, and I think we've talked about it in a number of other talks today, is that we're very keen to kind of increase the compatibility of the web and kind of capabilities in the web. So we're kind of trying to work on kind of making sure that any kind of APIs that we either introduce or places where we've got existing APIs and developers are finding that kind of cross-browser compatibility is an issue, and Chrome in particular is the issue. We want to make sure that we fix those issues as well. So there's a lot of work being going into kind of making sure the web platform tests and also Chrome as well are actually maintained, and we're actually also making sure that there's increased compatibility across the web platform. I think one of the final pieces is as well is we've doing a lot of work on Crostini at the moment, and that's basically VM Linux containers on Chrome OS. I think the goal behind this from my side at the moment is that we want to make sure that Chrome OS is a premier web development environment. When it first came out, developers liked the idea of Chrome OS is like a web platform kind of enabled tool, but no one could build on it at the time. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is we've been able to kind of, obviously bring Linux containers to the web platform, or to Chrome OS, sorry, which means that you can run VS Code, you can run Firefox on Chrome OS and a whole bunch of other stuff like that as well. But I think one of the interesting things as well, it's one of the only platforms where you can actually run native Android based browsers directly on the environment without having to go through an emulator as well. So we're looking at that, and we're kind of experimenting with this a little bit more as well. So if anyone's got a Chrome OS machine that can enable kind of Linux-based apps, try it out and give us feedback about what should be improved. And I think the final piece is we've done a lot of work recently as well in terms of trying to create a better place for us to be able to kind of integrate our kind of developer-focused tooling. So Lighthouse is one example. Into a place where we can kind of analyze your site and then identify areas where you can improve your experience, and then give you hands-on guidance, tutorials, and best practice to kind of go through. And so we launched web.dev as well. And so our team will be doing a lot more work in this space to actually, if we can kind of start to test sites even more thoroughly with Lighthouse, we can kind of guide developers through kind of exactly how to improve their sites, and then also give developers case studies about why they should do it and kind of why they should prioritize certain features over others as well. So that's pretty much it from the Chrome side of things. Yeah, I went a little bit over. So
no, thank you. Wow, web.dev looks really exciting. How fun. All right, so last but not least, I'm super excited to have Daniel, who will be talking about Opera Browser.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here. So let's see.
And you're a little bit quiet. I don't know.
You can hear me? Or
yes. It's actually better. Okay. I don't know why, but
maybe it's auto-tuned or something. Let's see. Where is my presentation? There is my presentation.
Awesome.
So Yep. So I'm from Opera, and my name is Bratell. I'm the web tech lead at Opera, and also one of the Blink API owners, which we're a team that kind of gauge the Blink, the web engine in Chromium, against unsuitable changes for the web platform, and also a developer in Chromium and Blink. So some background here. Opera is, of course for me, I'm not sure it's of course for everyone else, but it's one of the oldest browser companies, starting in 1995. We focused a lot on making a really fast and small browser, and then we changed in 2013 to using Chromium, mostly because of compatibility issues, as we heard from the Firefox people. Compatibility is important to users, and we spent way too much time on that. So now with Chromium or Blink, we get much better compatibility and can focus much more on features in the UI. Basically, we work in Chromium. We try to be a good contributor to Chromium. We do changes mostly, of course, things that are good for our products, but we also do changes for the web. For certain really good things in the old browser, and we want to make sure that these stay good as well. So we stayed and focused on things like HTTP and CSS and performance and footprint and all those things that people really liked with the old Opera. We still do in the new Opera, which is like 5 years old now, so it's not even new. This was like, I kind of assumed that someone else will have talked about the Chromium changes, and I think Paul Kinlan did that. So I'm not going to talk about what's happening in Chromium. Instead, I'm going to talk about what's happening in Opera. We have a few features recently which we think are interesting. In our most recent, I think, Opera for Android, we added something which we call the cookie dialog blocker, which is kind of a follow-up to an ad blocker. As people in the EU probably knows, we have these privacy laws which try to protect users against losing their privacy on the internet. Unfortunately, lots of people want to know things about people, so instead of adapting to the laws, they try to get around them with these confirm this and say hi, okay to this. And the user ends up with the worst of both things. They get an annoying web page, and they still get to contribute, lose part of their privacy. So we try to fix at least the annoying part by extending our ad blocker to also block or hide cookie dialogues. This is it's also something that will come, I expect, rather soon to our other products on other platforms. But right now, it's just for Android. Another new feature that we are working on, which is kind of experimental, is a crypto wallet. It's also a little bit based on the same idea of having some kind of decentralized, not exposed life on the internet. It's I think Brave has talked about similar things. They've done similar things where you have some access to Ethereum and their decentralized app framework, which is kind of cool, where it's not just a crypto coin. People think about crypto coins, but Ethereum has so much more. And you can have this virtual machine with a certain state, which you can change in a secure and distributed, decentralized way. And we're bringing this as an experiment now to our Android browser as well. And finally, we're also trying to connect the desktop and mobile experiences. So we have this flow application or flow feature where you can send web pages between the phone and the PC making sure that you're not locked to your PC or limited by the small screen in your phone. You can easily move things between your browsers. We're also connecting desktop and mobile in the crypto wallet experiment. So we have our phones. We are keeping them close to us. We're keeping them kind of secure. Phones often have secure key storage. So we think that phones is a good place to store secrets. On the other hand, you want to use your PC. So we're trying to make some kind of application here where you can spend your crypto tokens, crypto kittens, something on the PC, but you have all the secrets on your phone, on your Opera on your phone. So that's also really, really new features, and you probably have to use the developer versions to try this out. And that's the end of my presentation. So any questions?
Cool. Thank you so much. That was really awesome, actually, just to see, you know, it's like I personally don't get to hear about Opera enough. So it's really, really, really cool to see what you guys are doing and kind of how you guys are also participating in just moving the web forward. So thank you so much. So I'm going to move on to questions, and also just panelists, if you guys have any questions for each other, feel free. One of my first questions is, we're definitely seeing a few folks using Chromium under the hood. So anybody can answer this. Maybe Paul, it's better for you to answer this. But I think from a web perspective, if you just look at it, people kind of are like, oh wow, everyone's using Google, but I know that it's much more open source focused and there's a lot of different contributors. So how does Google or the Chromium team really think about that and how everyone's using it? It's kind of like a fuzzy question, but I'm trying to.
I don't know how to answer that. It's like, yeah, we like a lot of people using it, right? I mean, I think the thing about Chrome and Blink and everything is that there's multiple different ways that people can embed Chrome. I'll say Chromium, I think is the easiest way of saying it. So like you got the content shell, you got the renderer, and depending on what you want to try and do on the Blink side of things, there's plenty of different options on that side of things. So it's like, I think from the Chrome side is like, we're very happy to have multiple companies, businesses, browser vendors actually using this and trying to use kind of the Chromium project in multiple different ways on our side. So I think it's a net win for everyone, just broadly, because there's a lot of work that's gone into kind of, like from the history of Chrome through like originally through WebKit as well. Like, there's a lot of work that's gone into kind of like providing a very standards compliant, as much as possible, I suppose, kind of platform. And I think from our side is like, when you look at the work that Kenneth's been doing, for instance, like the work that they've been doing on kind of integrating the newer, richer capabilities in there, like that's not stuff that we would have been able to do as well. Because like the engineering teams, it's probably big, but it's still finite, right? And there's a whole bunch of different priorities. So in terms of like an open source project, having extra contributors come in and kind of like be able to push the platform forward, it's actually really good on our side. So I don't really have a strong answer on that side. I think other than, yeah, it's good, right? It's cool. But like, I think the other bit as well is like we do want to see a larger kind of a large ecosystem. So like, Firefox Gecko is an important component of the web ecosystem. WebKit as well at that point as well. Like this isn't kind of one of those things where it's like we want the one browser on our side or the one engine. Like it's just good for us to be able to push forward as quickly as possible and provide support for everyone else. So
for sure. And then I guess a leading question that probably a lot of folks ask is why do you want people to use Chromium? Like, what's the general goal besides, I guess, moving the web forward? Like, are there any other reasons?
You mean users or developers, or?
Just why is it beneficial, I guess, for other browsers to be using Chromium under the hood?
I mean, it depends on how quickly people want to get, a browser to the, out to their users at that point. So whether you see someone like, I know, Samsung is a good example. Brave is a good example. You know, the Beaker, like the Beaker browser and everything. Is like if we can provide the engine on top of that, it helps other people, you know, push the platform forward and experiment, you know, with different ways of delivering web content and experiences to users at that point. I think some of those things are not things that we would probably naturally look at. So like the DAP protocol is not something that we kind of have actually even started to. I don't know actually completely, but I'm going to assume we haven't really done any experiments with it internally. So that itself is actually quite important for the ecosystem to be able to push forward. And if we've got a vehicle for people to be able to do that, I think that's actually pretty good.
I think a lot of it is just the general things that we know to be true about, you know, frameworks and libraries. They hold true for larger projects like Chromium as well. It's if you're trying to build some type of DOM abstraction utility, it's oftentimes best to go with, you know, maybe several years ago more than today, but often best to go with something like jQuery instead of rolling your own solution. If you're trying to, you know, polyfill a bunch of, you know, methods on some global objects, it might be better to do something like underscore or Lodash instead of rolling your own solution, because then you're not benefiting from the combined collective experience of the community itself. You're going to run into some obstacles that others have already encountered and overcome, and so it's going to delay your progress. It's going to cause several problems for you down the road. That being said, other people experimenting with parallel ideas are ways in which we challenge one another and we push the industry forward. And so if it worked for you know, Firefox back in the early 2000s, IE would have probably never woken up and started to do the amazing things that it's doing today, you know, with the birth of Edge and so forth. If it wasn't for, you know, IE kind of coming back to life and Firefox you know, doing so well, then Chrome may have never been born in 2008. And they just kind of all symbiotically help each other move forward in a pretty marvelous way.
Thank you. Yeah, and as we're starting to have more conversations, and this is why I love that, you know, we're featuring more folks like, you know, Intel browser. Samsung unfortunately wasn't able to join us this time, but hopefully featuring them as well, and of course Opera, because you know, for the folks that are, you know, what are we seeing in terms of, it's interesting because, you know, there were, you know, there's like the, I guess, you know, you can say Edge, Safari, Firefox, and Chrome are kind of the big four. But now we're, you know, as the web is moving forward and things are being more enabled, like, for example, using Chromium under the hood, for example, we're starting to see more browsers pop up and more adoption of those different things, like, you know, again, Brave and Beaker and, you know, all the other ones. So what are we seeing? What do you guys think is kind of like the theme of how new browsers or you guys are pushing things forward? Like, it sounds like more features. I've been hearing things like related to crypto and things like that. But what would you guys say in terms of themes?
I think each one of the individual teams, we all kind of have our own unique interests. And so Brave obviously is born out of the ads and tracking industry, trying to combat that. Google has been doing a phenomenal job in developing new standards, you know, building performance utilities, you know, a more optimized web platform itself. You've got individuals working on DAT and Beaker and stuff who are kind of rethinking the entire strata that underlines the entire way the internet works, this distributed peer-to-peer system. And so we all get to work on these individual interests of ourselves. It's almost like a hackathon or something, where we all get to take this common code base, work on our own unique interests, and develop, you know, solutions kind of in isolation almost with communication, but then bring those back ultimately to benefit everybody as a whole, when you can't really have one team focusing on everything. And so I think ultimately it's great to have this distribution of burdens across different teams, and then we all kind of collectively bring this back by way of the W3C or some other type of mechanism, and kind of fold it all back into some type of common solution to make the future of the web better for everybody collectively.
I think that's totally right. The other thing that sort of stands out to me is that Microsoft betting on Chromium has to relate to the bet on Electron that they made with VS Code. And so that seems to be actually helping converge around, I think, PWAs in the long run, because we know the desktop PWAs are on the way. And I think that's what Microsoft is responding to, is that idea that, yeah, we want the web platform to be part of our desktop platform as well.
Anyone else have any comments? Daniel? No.
So what we see is that we have these four web engines left, but we get a lot of different UIs. So we get like different fights, competition in the engine space and in the UI space. So if I'm optimistic, this will lead to really good UIs and really good web engines, and someone can combine the best of both. But we'll see.
I love that. So this may or may not be a topic that you guys, you know, are dealing with or nothing about. So I'm just gonna. It was a comment in the chat. It was Michael said the Article 13 topic being implemented with European service is an issue that he would love to hear more about. Does anybody have any comments about that?
I have to go and see exactly what 13 is. I know that I think 14 talks about data breaches. And so when you look at the way in which the online advertising industry has changed, it's become, I mean, it was kind of a mess from the very beginning. We just weren't really woke to the issue, I guess. You know, but like in 94 or so is when we actually got online advertising. You had things like net gravity and double click pop up in 94, 95, right when JavaScript was, you know, appeared in the browser. They were already co-opting this for online tracking, and it was largely a harmless process. But then you see things like in 2009 with the emergence of real-time bidding, where in order to save revenue from wasted impressions, you know, Tracy herself is auctioned off within 100 milliseconds to the highest bidder for each ad slot on the page she visits. Same with, you know, Sampson and every other individual. And so you start to see a lot of information about us and our browsing habits, private information, things that we don't necessarily want to share with anybody. It's being seeped out into this sea of faceless third parties for real-time bidding, and that constitutes a data breach. That's not information that we ever gave anyone consent to share. And it's being you know, preserved on servers that we have no control over. We don't know who to reach out to have that information deleted. And so there's quite a bit of stuff happening here. I see that 13 is the copyright law, so I'm actually completely off topic here. But I definitely do love. I know we talked earlier. Someone had talked about European laws to protect identity and information, and so this is these are all very healthy changes for the ecosystem. But for someone who wants to talk about the copyright law, I will step down.
Anyone feel like commenting?
I don't have any clue about it.
Okay, well, we'll save that topic to another, unless Harald, do you have anything to say?
There's a great Mozilla blog post from September talking about it. I personally have no deeper insights. It's definitely more on the outreach side of Mozilla. We were very involved with European law and US changes. So most of these, you'll find some word from us on. It's definitely, it can have an impact on open source and internet experiences and how people can share. So it's a very broad reach.
Cool, thank you so much. So Frédéric, I would love to ask you a question actually about Igalia and Igalia's involvement in all of these exciting things. How do you all determine what to focus on and what to contribute to?
Yeah, sure. So basically, Igalia is has a democratic structure. So, and we are organized into small teams. We have some one team which focus on Chromium, one team on Webkit, my own team which focus more on the web platform. So basically, each team tries to propose something to find which feature we think is interesting to invest into, or which feature we can contribute to. And we also have some clients, so it depends also on what the customers propose. And then where we decide this, then I mean each team proposes something to what we call the assembly. So all the people, so democratic structure with all the people, and then when we can vote about whether we accept projects or whether we accept some investment and so on.
Cool, that's awesome. Let me see. I'm going to look for other questions. One question actually I have is, I know, again, we did the browser contributor days where Addie and I kind of went out and asked the web, what are you interested in? What topics are you interested in related to a browser and browser standards? Besides standards bodies, and maybe you guys can talk about that as well, but what other areas do you all gather in? Is it just random conversations here and there, or is there anything more formal that's going on? Because again, I love to see the collaboration, and I'm sure people are curious.
I think, yeah, there's, especially between engines, there's a lot of collaboration happening. Like just recently was done some experimental feature with Firefox and Puppeteer. So there's just between product teams and engineering teams, between mailing lists, just people jump on different threads all the time. So we have recurring meetings with the Chrome team on different topics, on which standards we want to drive forward, especially for really big efforts like WASM. It's just long running, and you have to organize around like what's the next big important thing we're going to solve, and how do we make sure developers can adopt it. So there's and especially these like high investment pieces just have to have browser backing across all browsers. That's how they make the biggest impact, because otherwise people are waiting, like, okay, it's going to ship in one browser. I'm just going to wait here a bit until it ships in every browser, and then I'm going to use it. So that's not that works if you want to experiment how an API works, or maybe the shape of how it's being given to developers. But if you really want to, if you have a great idea that could really change the web, you need to get everyone in the boat, and that started with way back. It worked for PWAs, like getting everybody aligned, because nobody wants to have another browser-specific solution that just like sits there and rots, like WebSQL or Pinnacle and other things that they work for a bit, and then like actually it wasn't a great idea. So that's where I think having multiple browsers at a table and everybody bringing up concerns and being able to be two ideas and like pivot to maybe that's actually a better idea, like going from app cache to service workers. It took a while, but I think that's where browsers learned that collaboration is good, and that teams are collaborating on the engineering side, on the product side, on the DevRel side, on MDN side, documentation. So there's a lot of that happening. That's sometimes out in the open on mailing lists or bugs, and sometimes just meeting up or catching out at conferences. So.
Anyone else? How about I don't know. Kenneth, you're so involved in standards, but I'm just curious from the Opera and the Intel side, like, do you guys, besides participating in all the exciting things, are there any other back channels?
Well, I guess like there's a lot of different channels. So if you want to make a difference, networking is the important part. So like I try to go to a lot of conferences, meeting with the web developers, meeting with browser vendors. We talk in the W3C, we talk at different events. I'm reaching out to people from Node.js Foundation to the TC39, always trying to figure out like alignment, figuring out like what do we want. But then like everything happens because there's people that really believes in things. Like there was a few people really believing in progressive web apps. Like I was one of them. I know like Paul Kinlan was one of the other people. And I think like if we hadn't got all of these people together and invested together, this just wouldn't have happened. And I think that's how it is for many times. So even in companies, we do have like goals, alignment, maybe saying, for instance, from Intel, we want everything to run faster on our hardware. Maybe we want to expose like capabilities, because like you're selling a new hardware, if this capability is not being exposed, they're useless, especially if everyone is moving to the web. But those are kind of just like guidelines, but you still need the developers to come up with the ideas, to talk together with other people. And I think like we have these fire souls in the community that really tries to drive like their ideas forward. And like there's so many channels. Twitter was something that I ignored for a long time, and then figure out that this is actually a really great place to connect to different people and different ideas and figure out what's going on in our community. So definitely many channels.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many places where we talk. There are conferences, and there are standards groups, and there are spec groups, and there are mails and everything. If I look at this from Blink API owner perspective, we have this big risk where Chrome right now is doing really well, and it's possible to do things in Blink which don't wait for other browsers. And I see that as a big risk for the web. So we have this process, we have this documented process where we try to ensure that everything we do, it's communicated, it's documented. We try to not do things where other browser vendors actively resist it because they will not implement it. That probably means it's a bad idea. So we try to make sure that all browser vendors, or at least the majority of the browser vendors, are with us in all the ideas that people come through with.
Yeah, another important thing to highlight is not only how vendors and developers and browser vendors communicate, but how the community can actually engage that conversation too. Because I think there's the impression a lot that this stuff only happens at the Google campus or on the Microsoft campus or something like that. It's just, you're geographically prevented from actually engaging the group that makes these decisions. Whereas the standards bodies and different browser vendors have gone a long way in actually opening up doors and gateways for the general community to have a voice in the conversation. And so I know, one of the places I like to visit is the WCAG discourse. That's discourse.wicg.io, I think it is. And anyone can sign up. It's not, you don't have to pay a membership fee or anything like that. You sign up, you can start to post your ideas, submit ideas for the web platform itself, engage with the individuals who are working on the browsers themselves directly. And it's pretty incredible how little friction there is to engage in the process today for just about anybody.
Yeah, I love that. Again, I love how open the web is. I mean, it's really amazing to see the collaboration, and it's really amazing to see, how each one of you individually is kind of working on something different and something new, and then borrowing ideas from each other and cross collaborating. It's really nice. So, and again, getting people involved. We just did a recent podcast on modern web with Dominic Ferrolino, who does, he's contributed to a bunch of these different things, and I think interned at a bunch of different places. So Google Japan is going to be his next one. But just hearing how, somebody who's in college can just, start talking to people and getting involved and really start contributing and, again, helping move the web forward. So, and again, this is also why we do browser contributor days, a way for developers to see how open the web is and how they too can start getting involved and make a difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for the This.JavaScript State of Browsers. For browsers, we do this once every 6 months. So the next one you will be seeing in about May or June. Again, if you want to share this out, this is live streamed and also recorded, so feel free to share it. And otherwise, we will see you on the next event. Thanks for joining.